I want to introduce you to Ross Blotcher. Ross is a member. Ross is a member of our church, and he is a freelance. What you like?
I'm an animation guy. I do post-production. You can pick compositing.
All those sorts of things.
Yeah, excellent.
This is not his area of expertise, but he's done a lot of reading on it. And I think one of the things that means. Thank you very much. I think that one of the things that means, I can do that, is that what he talks about is extremely accessible to most of us. Because if all of a sudden we get somebody up here who, is going to, work with pie or cake, then, we're not going to be able to get our brains around what that person has to say. Ross makes things accessible to us. What he's going to ask, and I'm going to reinforce with you right now, let's hold all questions till the end so that he can get through what it is he's going to do. And if you guys need to take off, then please feel free. We understand the timing. It is difficult for some people. So just open your minds and clear your souls, and let's understand what Christ has to speak to us through us this afternoon. So let's pray and then get started. Gracious God, we thank you so much for the beauty of this day, for the rain, for the good that it does. We ask that you would allow us to try to have hearts that are open to understanding, that you would live within us as we seek to do all that we do in excellence. And Lord, there be any falsehood in anything, we pray that you would reveal that to us and just speak truth to us. And we thank you for Ross. We thank you for the hard work that he has put into this. And we just ask your blessing upon him. In your name we pray. Amen.
Well, thank you.
Thank you for the great send-up, too. Also, I made some handouts, and I'm not giving them to you now, so you'll listen to me. But afterwards, it'll help summarize some of the points, some of the quotes. So we're talking about evolution and Christian faith. Well, why are we talking about it today? As Pastor talked about in his sermon, tomorrow is the birthday of Charles Darwin and also Abraham Lincoln. Actually, they were born in the same year on the same day. Coincidence? I don't know what that would mean. But it's amazing timing, perfect timing, that Pastor Paul's sermon series on character should currently be focused on open-mindedness, curiosity, and the love of learning, because those are the exact traits that we need to talk about this subject. And when we think about evolution and Christian faith, we immediately think of a few verses. A few verses come to mind. Evolution, or they don't. Evolution versus creationism. Evolution versus intelligent design. We're going to talk about that in a little bit. But first, let's focus on the broader issue, science versus religion. We've all seen this in one form or another. One of the battlegrounds of science versus religion are bumpers. This is the Christian fish. Some of you may have it on your bumpers. And unprovoked, the Darwin fish crawled forth from the ooze. And then we saw the truth fish eating the Darwin fish. And now there's all manner of variations. The reality bites fish, like, get used to it. And the flying spaghetti monster fish. I don't know. That's really a fish. There are far more important battlegrounds where this is being fought and debated in our schools, at our school boards, over education, and in our court systems with taxpayer dollars. So this is important. Is this a uniquely American phenomenon? Well, kind of. A recent survey that was published of 34 countries, thank you for sending that to me, Rihanna, showed that of 34 developed countries, the United States was penultimate in its acceptance of evolution. At 40%, the only country lower in its acceptance of evolution was Turkey, which, as you may know, is largely fundamentalist Islam. You see, in Northern Europe, there's a lot of countries at 80% or above, Japan at 78%, so this is somewhat a unique debate. If we break down the numbers in 2005, we see that 40% accept evolution, almost the same number, 39%, reject it outright in the United States, and 21% are unsure. If we compare that with 1985, we see that the numbers were a little larger for the acceptors and the rejectors, and the unsure category was smaller. So over the last 20 years, the only category that has grown are the people who are unsure. So clearly, our current discourse on this subject is not helping things. It's only adding to our confusion. So how do we find common ground? Because science and religion seem to be two different approaches to truth, and they seem to offer two different flavors of truth. How do we compare these apples and oranges? Well, we have one very good tool in our toolkit, and that is that truth cannot contradict truth. Now that may sound very simple and very obvious, but it's very important for this. This thing keeps wanting to come off. Because of this, we don't have to be afraid of new information. Oftentimes we get things that we hold on to very closely, things that we know to be true and we want them to be true, and we try to protect them. We say, don't tell me anything new, I don't want to hear any new evidence or anything that might make me have to, give this up. I really want this. But because truth cannot contradict truth, there are only two things that can happen. Either the new evidence that comes in will confirm what you already believe to be true, and it'll make it all the stronger, or it will show you that you were wrong, and you can embrace new truth. So because of that, the outcome of honest inquiry can only be positive. And this goes along with what Pastor Paul was talking about, because this requires open-mindedness, curiosity, and the love of learning. Pastor Paul has a quote, "All truth is God's truth," which you might take to heart. Romans 12:2 says, "Do not conform any longer to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your minds." Read it in context, but I think it fits in this. Now, when we think about science knowledge specifically, what kind of truths does science teach us? We think of someone kind of like Dr. Mad Scientist from earlier in the skit. He's got a long white lab coat, he's bent over an Erlenmeyer flask or a test tube, and he's doing science, right? Well, the UCLA anthropologist Jared Diamond sheds light on this. He says, "Science is often misrepresented as the body of knowledge acquired by performing replicated controlled experiments in the laboratory." Well, that's true, but actually science is something much broader, the acquisition of reliable knowledge about the world. Okay, that sounds good, reliable knowledge. So how do we get that reliable knowledge? Well, all good science begins with observation. First, we look at the world, we get evidence, facts, things that we understand about the world. But then we say, well, how do we reconcile those with other facts? How do we make sense of all this? And so from that desire comes theory. We create a theory that fits all the facts that we've gotten already, and it anticipates new facts. This has a few benefits. First of all, it's repeatable. You can do it over and over, and if it's right, if your theory holds true, it should happen the same way each time, no matter how you rejigger the variables. It's reliable, meaning you can have someone in Finland do the same experiment, and it'll work there, or Australia, or wherever. It's predictable. It helps us to interpret new data and to predict new data. We can say, I suppose that if we went and we dug here or we did this there, it would be explained this way in the theory. And then we can either confirm or disconfirm our theory. And it's actionable, meaning you can use science. You can get up in the air and fly in a plane, or you can go to the moon. Science actually gets us somewhere. Now, because of this, because science is an open-ended process, something that's continually being added to and refuted and revised, all the truths that come from science are provisional truths, meaning truths with a lowercase t, truths that may in time prove to be wrong. So we tentatively accept them. But some people point to that as a weakness of science. They say, well, science is telling us, one day butter's good for you, and then margarine's better for you, and then one day, eggs are good for you, and don't eat eggs, they're bad for you. How can we really trust science? Well, that's true, and there is a lot of give and take as theories become more established. But the strongest theories are those that have existed for a long time, taken in a lot of data, predicted a lot of data, been extremely actionable. As you can see, all these tools play into the strength of a scientific theory. Science has a couple other tools in its belt. One is falsifiability. If your theory is stated properly, all good scientific theories are stated in such a way that there could be disconfirmatory evidence, meaning you could find something that would completely disprove everything that you had theorized. That makes science very strong. Also, peer review, one of the greatest aspects of science. If I come up with a scientific discovery, I have to put it out in a journal somewhere where the rest of the scientific community is going to jump in and just tear me apart. And if there is a weakness, they should find it, and it's always open to that. And part of that is that, as Richard Feynman would say, no one is hallowed in science. No one is beyond reproach. So it doesn't matter who came up with the theory, he can still be overthrown. And the greatest rewards in science are given to those who overthrow previous assumptions. The Galileos, the Copernicuses, the Darwins, the Isaac Newtons, and the Einsteins. So with that in place, with that understanding, let's talk about evolution. I said all good theories begin with an observation. And the observation at the time of evolution's origins was about the world. It was, we are surrounded by incredible diversity. There's just so much life, it's so wonderful, and it comes in all these varieties. How do we explain that? And that is the question and the observation that evolution set out to deal with. So if it is such a robust theory, it has to explain. We had these categories of animals, and birds, and mammals, and reptiles, and amphibians, and fish, and trees, and fungi, and bacteria. So we have to explain all that. We have to explain some of the similarities and some of the differences. Why do all the vertebrates have 5 fingers, even if they have fins? That's my favorite, the platypus. So science has to explain all that. Why do we see these similarities? We've seen species go extinct, but can you make a new species? Has that happened? How does that happen? So, how does evolution, that's pretty bold. How does evolution propose to solve all that? Well, evolution can be stated simply. Evolution is the non-random survival of randomly varying replicators. Okay, maybe that wasn't so simple. That's a mouthful, right? Well, let's unpack that. All right, so all evolution needs to get started is replicators, something that makes copies of itself. For this example, we're using a word that makes copies of itself, horse, 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 horse. We need something extra, though. If we make it so that our horse, or other words, can have multiple offspring, and we change, well, we don't change, but if the process of duplication of having offspring is not perfect, meaning that sometimes the offspring will not look exactly like their parents, then we get diversity. As you can see, it moves down, and by the 5th generation, we have horse still, but we also have 2 nonsense words, worst, house, goose, mios, that's another nonsense word, and mauve. And another thing arises as we get to this 5th generation. You can see it's getting pretty packed. If this box that those words are inside of is the world in which these words live, then something's got to give before the next generation can be born. They can't all fit. And so that limit may sometimes be a limit of food or some other resources or mates or whatever. And so if we apply a selection criteria, we say that sense words make more offspring than nonsense words. They're more successful at reproducing. We get something like this. Our 3 nonsense words die out, and it goes on, and this continues. This is the basic beginning. So we say, how does that apply to us as biological creatures and all the other biological creatures in the world? Well, our self-replicator is DNA. And our information in that DNA is encoded as, I've abbreviated it here, ACGT. Just like computers encode all information in 1s and 0s, so we encode all our information with these nucleotides. And they're the same ones for all life that we found. And then our genes, which really are the base unit that selection applies to, are the sections of code that survive long enough to make it into future generations. So the pressures then that we face, as we compete for things in that little box of ours called the Earth, all fall under the category of survival of the fittest. We've all heard this, right? That's the token phrase of evolution. Now we often think fittest, that means the strongest, right? And the fastest, only those survive. Well, not really. In this case, fittest just means the best able to create offspring, to have children. So sometimes that may mean you have to be the most generous, or you may have to be the fastest, or maybe you have to be the slowest. So we see this in the form of competition between different species and individuals within a species. And all of this is described as natural selection, when it just takes place without people, intervening. That's just the natural order of things. Again, someone's got to give. One of the prime examples of this is sexual selection. in which you're the best at having offspring if you are the most attractive to another mate. And of course, the peacock there is our quintessential example of that. Obviously, those huge, ridiculous feathers do not help him fly anywhere. Also, his bright colors and those same feathers do not help him camouflage and evade predators. So obviously, the costs of that have to be outweighed by the benefit of being attractive to a mate. There's also artificial selection. This is a relatively recent phenomenon. This is where we actually go in and we affect this process of selection. We see this with all our agriculture, all the grains that we have cultivated over the years. We see this with livestock. Actually, there's a great example in Genesis 30, and I put it on the handout, and I recommend you read it later, where Jacob kind of cheats his father-in-law Laban by differential selection of the goats that he's meant to tend, and he ends up with the greater flocks. Jacob was kind of a squirrely guy, but I recommend that you read that. Genesis does have some interesting lessons. We don't need to rip it out of your Bible. And co-adaptation is another factor going on here, where we find that, let's say, a fox is chasing a rabbit, and the fastest rabbits survive the best to pass on their genes, and then faster, foxes need to survive to actually catch those faster rabbits, and we get these kind of evolutionary arms races where we end up with things that are highly adapted to one another. This might include orchids that have pistils that look just like the butt of a female bee that they need the male to pollinate. So we're kind of begging the question, what is a species? Well, like a gene, species is really hard to define because it's kind of it doesn't fit neatly into categories, but we're humans and we like to make categories, so we came up with species. Generally consists of all the individual organisms of a natural population which are able to interbreed, generally sharing similar appearance, characteristics, and genetics due to having relatively recent common ancestors. So in other words, they can interbreed and produce offspring. And we see species go extinct. How does new species get made? Well, this is the process of speciation, as evolution describes it, where, let's say you have a herd of, pick an animal, elk. How about elk? They come up to a mountain range, and half of them split off to the north side of the mountain, half of them split off to the south side of the mountain. No longer can these two groups mate. And if we leave them alone for, let's say, 50,000 years and we come back, we may find that only 50% of the time can they produce successful offspring. And then if we leave them alone for even longer and then we come back, maybe they can't produce offspring at all. And again, these lines are blurry. We see things like horses, which can mate with a donkey and produce a mule, and maybe 1 in 10,000 times that'll actually be fertile. But again, the lines are not that clear. So we've covered the broad strokes of evolution, and now we're faced with this very bold quote. It says, "Nothing in biology makes sense except in the light of evolution." That's Theodosius Dobzhansky, evolutionary biologist and Russian Orthodox Christian. So that begs the question, how do we know that evolution is true? Well, we've all heard about the fossil record, right? That's what everybody's quibbling about. And the idea of that is that if you go out somewhere in the world and you start digging, you're going to find the bones of creatures that lived in the past. And the geologic column is just an aspect of that. The deeper you dig, the further back in time you go, and you'll find different sorts of creatures, simpler life forms. And this always plays out. You'll find trilobites in their own layer, but you won't find humans in the same one. Secondly, we have comparative anatomy, like that illustration of the 5 fingers, being in whales and bats, highly modified, but you can still see them there. Even in horses, they have those 5 fingers, but they've all been fused together to a specialized hoof. So that has led us toward the truth of evolution. Also, biogeography, just the dispersal of life across the planet. We'll find similar species close to each other, and if we play back the history of it along with our fossil record and all the other evidence we have, that lends toward it. Comparative genetics are yet another factor, and this is a recent development that we have comparative genetics, where we can sequence the human genome, we can sequence the mammoth genome, and we can compare them on a code-by-code basis, with that ACTG. And this alone is enough. We wouldn't even need fossils. And finally, evolution makes reliable predictions. That's really the test. All our medicine is based on this, as Theodosia said. Viruses are mutating every single year, and so we have to create new medicines to fight them. I mean, it's through all of biology. There's a great quote from Pope John Paul II, and this was from a 1996 encyclical properly titled, "Truth Cannot Contradict Truth." Oh, where have we heard that before? New knowledge has led to the recognition of the theory of evolution as more than a hypothesis. It is indeed remarkable that this theory has been progressively accepted by researchers following a series of discoveries in various fields of knowledge. The convergence, neither sought nor fabricated, of the results of work that was conducted independently is in itself a significant argument in favor of this theory. So in that, he just outlined a few of the things that we were talking about that make science strong. But you can see he used the word convergence. A lot of different fields of study that have come to the same conclusion. Okay, so that all sounds pretty good. What is intelligent design? Why are there court battles going on? What are we teaching in schools? Let's talk about intelligent design. Is that an alternative to evolution? Well, first of all, intelligent design, and let me stress, this is with a capital I and a capital D. This isn't just the general idea that a creator could be responsible for life on Earth, but the specific movement that we're going to talk about. Intelligent design is in agreement with most of evolution's claims. The Earth is 4.5 billion years old, approximately. They don't have a problem with that. Earth has been around for approximately 3.5 billion. Common ancestry of all animals. Intelligent design proponents do not argue any of that. However, they state that evolution, if taken to its conclusion, is inherently atheistic, and that's bad. So what they do is they set up the argument so that you have Jesus versus evolution, essentially. Thirdly, I guess, we have irreducible complexity. This is one of their token ideas or hunches. And here we have the bacterial flagellum, which is the token example of this. That if you look at the tree of life, yes, we're all related, but if you look at certain branches, you'll find that there are things we can't explain yet, things that are just amazingly complex. And, well, how can we explain that? By a gradual, step-by-step process like evolution. And so intelligent design proponents point to this, and they say, science can't explain this. That is what God had to have done. And they also argue from the fine-tuned universe. They point to a lot of statistics. They'll say, boy, the chance of the world being, the Earth being the right distance from the sun, and in a solar system where this is the case and that is the case, is 1 in 10 billion, 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 billion. So that can't just have happened. That's a sort of argument. Also, they focus on teaching the controversy. They say, look, there's a large cultural debate in the media and amongst various people. Let's teach that in the science class. So there's a couple weaknesses there. First of all, the false dilemma that we have Jesus versus evolution, or that evolution is inherently atheistic. It's kind of like those emails that you might have gotten that say, if you really love Jesus, you'll forward this to everyone in your inbox. And you go, no, that's a false dilemma. I don't need to feel bad about that. And here's a great quote from Judge John E. Jones, who ruled, John E. Jones, not Johnny Jones, who ruled in the recent Dover versus Kitzmiller court case. Both defendants and many of the leading proponents of ID, intelligent design, make a bedrock assumption which is utterly false. Their presupposition is that evolutionary theory is antithetical to a belief in the existence of a supreme being and to religion in general. Repeatedly in this trial, plaintiffs' scientific experts testified that the theory of evolution represents good science, is overwhelmingly accepted by the scientific community, and that it in no way conflicts with, nor does it deny, the existence of a creator. So then we have another weakness, and that is the either-or fallacy, and this is kind of similar, where what you do is you take theory A, you don't like it or you think it's wrong, and you set up theory B, and then you point out weaknesses or things that A has not yet explained. This does not constitute evidence for theory B. It just doesn't work that way. You have to positively state something in support of theory B, and theory B has to support and explain everything that came before it. So this is a false reasoning. Kenneth Miller, one of those lead defendants the judge referred to, said, "The only evidence that intelligent design is able to muster is the observation that science has not yet explained everything, and therefore design must be kept around as a default explanation for what is left." And he is a Roman Catholic and one of the leading experts on the debate. I recommend one of his books. And so we come to another problem. There's no scientific theory yet behind intelligent design. Now, there's a lot of hunches, and that's good. Science begins with hunches sometimes, and then you go out and gather evidence and you roll up your sleeves and you do science. That's fine. But as yet, there's no scientific theory, and intelligent design is not published in journals. There's really nothing to state to put out in a journal and have other people refute. And the things that have been thrown out there, like bacterial flagellum, have been met by the science community. The science community has risen up to the challenge. It's a great thing that intelligent design proponents pointed out that we don't know much about the bacterial flagellum, because immediately we learned a ton about the bacterial flagellum. Now we know that there are about 40 different types of bacterial flagellum in varying levels of complexity with varying numbers of parts. We've also found a type 2 and 3 secretory systems for secreting things in other bacteria that are all the same as the motor, except it's missing one or two parts. So in other words, yes, it can happen by a stepwise process. And then also, another problem is that this battle is being fought in the media. It's being fought in schools and in costly court battles, when really, shouldn't we just be arguing this out in the halls of science? First do your work there, and then once the science is accepted, it'll pass down to the schools. That's how it works. And by all means, play the game. Join in. And I think the main problem here is that it stops the process of inquiry. It says, look, we have an explanation for this mystery, let's not look into it. What do you do then in the science class? You say, hey, Ned, come over here, look at my microscope. I can't explain this, can you? Ned says, no, come check out mine. Oh, I can't explain that either, that's crazy. That doesn't lead us anywhere, that's not science. And again, that's against what we've been talking about, which is open-mindedness, curiosity, and the love of learning. Here's a quote from Leanne Cheney, professor of biology at Whitworth College, where DJ goes. As a Christian, part of my belief system is that God is ultimately responsible. But as a biologist, I need to look at the evidence. Scientifically speaking, I don't think intelligent design is very helpful because it does not provide things that are refutable. There's no way in the world you can show it's not true. Drawing inferences about, that's the falsifiability issue we were talking about. Drawing inferences about the deity does not seem to me to be the function of science because it's very subjective. And this leads us into theology. And it's a God of the gaps theology. What does this mean? Well, if you look at science as being, say, a brick wall, and the bricks are scientific knowledge, you can point to those gaps where the bricks haven't been filled in yet, and you can say, ha-ha, you pesky scientists, you haven't explained that yet. That's where my God lives. Okay, that's fine, and we've seen that throughout history. But what happens when new bricks get put in? Your God becomes the incredible shrinking God. And here we see he's gotten tinier and tinier. Instead, I recommend a God who lives on every single brick. Don't see your God as being God of the gaps. So my conclusion, again, this is my conclusion, and I invite you to question it. Intelligent design may be well-intentioned, but it's bad science, and it's bad theology. Evolution is good science, 150-year-old science, and again, we talked about the longevity of a theory, and it is compatible with a belief in God. And so, I will quote Michael Shermer, columnist for Scientific American and director of the Skeptic Society. It should not matter how God created life, whether it was through a miraculous spoken word or through the natural forces of the universe that he created. The grandeur of God's works command awe regardless of what process he used. We have learned a lot in 4,000 years, and that knowledge should never be dreaded or denied. Theists and theologians should embrace science, especially evolutionary theory, for what it has done to reveal the magnificence of the divinity in a depth never dreamed by our ancient ancestors. So to conclude, I will be the first to agree and admit that we as humans need awe and wonder and mystery. And science provides awe and wonder in spades. And mystery is good too, but pick your mysteries. Don't pick mysteries that have already had light shed on them. There will be plenty more. And as Paul did, I encourage young people to pursue science. If they have the love of learning and curiosity and open-mindedness, I also encourage you parents to encourage them and help them in that effort. And so I open the floor to questions and answers. I was going to be here to help you.
I am. Your presentation is very good, but it's one-sided.
Yes.
Obviously.
Yes.
4.5 billion years ago, if you go back 1 second prior to that, what existed?
1 second part of that?
In other words, what happened? What was here before the universe existed?
Again, that's a great question, and that's
Evolutionary theory doesn't cover that. And what did Adam and Eve, what were they?
right.
Humans?
Stop on the first question.
Okay, all right, so we'll just take that first one. You're right, and that may be a continuing mystery. I certainly don't know. I was not there. And again, those can be mysteries, but let's not, stop science from asking those questions.
Science shouldn't stop asking those questions. There's
No.
a lot of very good Christian apologists who use science to prove their
Absolutely.
non-theories.
And as Pastor Paul said in his sermon, science is strong in that it begs people to come and question it and overthrow previous assumptions. So yes, we should never stop asking those questions. And just for a technical note, evolution deals with replicators. And so it doesn't say anything about how those replicators got there in the first place.
Yeah, but there's no transitional fossil record either. So.
Well, there it is. But we wouldn't even need that because we have comparative genetics and so many other things that shed light on evolution.
Let me deal with the question of
Yes.
what Adam and Eve were.
Yeah, they were human.
Well, yeah, the question is,
about it's natural selection or.
yeah, again, you have to look at the question along the line. What the question was, who were Adam and Eve? Is that a good way to say it?
Well, yeah, how did
Okay.
they come about? I mean, if they were a matter of evolution and evolutionary theory.
Yeah,
they
and
would have come about from natural selection.
okay, and yeah, exactly. The biblical understanding is, frankly, we don't know. The word Adam, and if you think of it as a word, means humankind. That's what that word means. The word Eve means mother of all. So are those personal pronouns or are those descriptors of who they are? So that's, we don't know. And again, you get back to what I was talking about in Genesis 1 and Genesis 2, where you have these two similar creation stories. And, that's a theological question that we have to answer. Ross is answering from the standpoint of the scientific
If they came
approach.
about from natural selection, then they couldn't have fallen. I mean,
I'm sorry?
They were just doing what was coming natural.
Well, no, again, it would be a
How do you have
poetic,
a fallen earth and a fallen creation?
be a
Yeah, it
poet,
wasn't.
be a poetic issue is what it would be. So.
And you're right, this is a one-sided presentation. I do have it, I've already made it clear what I believe about this issue. And so I invite all of you to fact check me. Again, I put a lot of this in the handout. Oh, we can give out the handout now if you want to. Thank you. And look into this for yourself. It's an open process.
Somebody else.
As I mentioned to you
It's for the
earlier,
tape. So.
as I mentioned to Paul earlier, God created the heavens and the earth, and science was the toolkit that he used. The hammers and saws of science were in the toolkit that God used. That's my personal opinion.
By all means, I think that would be a very healthy way to look at it.
Yes?
Thank you for your presentation. One thing that always bothered me about it is that basically theology is a philosophy. It's not a science. And science, as you said, is basically something that is proven wrong as regularly as it is proven right. And Darwin's theory is certainly many, many occurrences fit within the context of it. But I've always been kind of dismayed that basically Darwin's theory is extended to the point of evolution. I mean, as Paul made a point in his sermon today, that I think there was a quote that was, "We extinguish the burning bush, and yet we run around with a book of matches trying to ignite every green shrub that we see." It's a matter of that spark of, if you will, creation. That is something that I don't think has ever been explained, and ultimately comes down to the root of a divine influence.
Sure, and I think that those are compatible. Again, it seems like apples and oranges sometimes, but like was just said over there, the more that science finds, that should just be seen as the method God used. Does that make sense? That the scientific discovery should only shed light on the process God used.
Well, again, it's one of those things where, I mean, science is basically trying to explain existing phenomena. As you,
Yes.
you had in your slide,
Oh,
that we science is a view into this world. However, other planets don't even follow the same rules of observation that we've seen, like for gravity.
Right, exactly. But of course, the theory of gravity explains that based on the mass of the planet. But you made a good point in that science, I did not include this in the presentation, but science has to deal with natural phenomena. It just can't. It's not that there's a group of old men in a room somewhere who say, science can't deal with the supernatural. It's just that those rules do not work within science, the whole repeatability thing and all that. So again, that's not saying that there isn't that sort of thing, but science just can't talk about it. I mean, it has no ground to discuss that. Yes?
I think as Christian adults, we have a huge responsibility. A lot of kids come out of public schools, they're very confused. So my comment's not on your, it was a great presentation, thank you. But it's our responsibility to help the confusion, to stop the confusion. And my biggest complaint is that the theory of evolution is not taught in the public schools, generally speaking, as theory. It's dropped off that it's the theory of evolution, and that's my biggest complaint. And that's what I strive in my life. I strive to contradict that. I teach children that it's just a theory. And every science class I teach in the beginning God created. And so that's all I have to say. We have a huge responsibility to help the confusion.
If I may respond to that, I totally agree. That was the point of those two pie charts. It showed that just the level of confusion is the only thing on the rise. But you're right, evolution is a theory. And okay, it's just a theory, but in science, that's the best we've got. We've got really good supported theories, and we've got theories that are new and still being tested. This was the sticker placed in the Cobb County, Georgia textbooks in 2002. It said, "This textbook contains material on evolution. Evolution is a theory, not a fact, regarding the origin of living things. This material should be approached with an open mind, studied carefully, and critically considered." Now, I agree with most of that. That's right. It should be carefully considered. It should be critically considered and studied carefully with an open mind. That's all correct. The reason the courts threw it out is because it somehow singled out evolution as being more.
It's the only theory.
Right. Well, then we'd have to say, create a new theory, and by all means, you can fight it out in science, and then it will make its way into the schools. Yes. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes.
This isn't so much of a question as an aha moment that I just wanted to share. Also, thank you for the presentation. Thank you for doing it so eloquently. You use English, as it were, rather than monosyllabic words. Hallelujah. When you were talking about Adam, it hit me that the English language has so many words that here, H-E-R-E, or here, H-E-A-R. There, and there are. Atom and atom. Is it possible that an all-knowing entity and being, long before any of us spoke English and printed it, I just want to put the thought out there, that it's possible that science and theology were overlapping from the very beginning in Adam and atom.
Thank you for that thought. Yes, Mr. Clark.
Okay. I thought it was a wonderful presentation. I think there's only one issue that you and I really differ on, and that's our belief in God. But aside from that, everything was laid out perfectly in a way that I would love everyone to embrace. This does not paint us as adversaries. Instead, it paints us as counterparts in a struggle to understand that which is going on around us. Excuse me. I think all too often people turn this into a conflicting issue. Several quotes that I've heard from Richard Dawkins are very much incendiary, I feel, and offensive. But then again, there are many Christians who very openly things that are also very incendiary and offensive. We're at each other's throats currently, but I don't think that this is an issue where we have to combat one another. I believe that God created the universe, and I also believe that ultimately, if I don't understand every single bit about that before I die, that it's not a loss. Because the main important thing in my life is that God did do this. But I love what science is doing, and that it helps to explain the mysteries of this universe that we live in. I mean, how well can we appreciate this great and grandiose place that we've been gifted with if we don't understand anything about it? So, I mean, for many years I was very fearful of pursuing this knowledge. My fear was based more or less completely in disproving God. I didn't want to look into evolutionary theory or the theories being presented by science because I love God and I don't want to disprove His existence. But now I see, and I think that this was the final nail in that coffin for me, because I shouldn't be afraid of exposing the truth. If I expose this truth, well, if like, just hypothetically, if this proves to me that God does not exist, then what am I fearful of? God's not going to punish me in the end. He's, He doesn't exist. But then at the same time, I get to understand, I get this great gift that science can offer me by gaining a better understanding of all that He has done. So I think it was a wonderful presentation. I think it conveyed your message quite well. Thank you so much for it.
Thank you, and well said. And I agree with that it is a process that can involve everyone, and the adversarial aspect of it just doesn't help anybody. Yes?
The question was presented earlier from the gentleman up here. What was the universe before God created it? There's a second half to that question. I'm not asking you per se, I'm going to be asking myself this, and I got to go home and research it. What was God doing before He created the universe and the earth?
Making help when people ask difficult questions.
You have to ask them, when did time begin? Was there anything before time? And yeah, those are fun questions.
Yeah, about 30 years ago, Science magazine.
Talk into the microphone.
It dealt with engineering, basically. There was a small article in there about some leading scientists. I can't remember how many and how they got questionnaires, but they were asked, can you create something from nothing? And what was interesting, whoever they were, and I can't remember, I think it was about 100 questionnaires. Every one of them came back and said, we don't believe you would create something from nothing. And as a non-Christian, that's the only thing that really stuck in my mind, and maybe helped me come to this church, I don't know. But I thought, if you can't create something from nothing, then where did this something come from? It had to start. That's pre-Bang theory, and that's where it had to start.
You're right, that's absolutely huge.
Somebody had to make it.
Okay, thank you.
This is said by a person who lives in Hollywood.
I always love the analogy of God explaining the creation story to mankind as a man trying to explain cable television to an ant. And I don't know who said it, but it's always stuck with me, and it's always been so beautiful because, the creation story in Genesis, if God were really to lay it all out for us, how long should that be? How long could it be? It could be countless, infinite volumes. But I just believe that in order for us to accomplish what God knew was best for us to accomplish here, He had to condense things, and He had to make it something that was understandable to us so that we could move forward from there. If we were caught up in the complexities of the creation and how it happened and how everything happened only, I think we would all be being pretty bad to each other in order to accomplish that. So in order to move forward from that point and get over the details, not ignoring them, but allowing them to contribute to something greater, He had to put it in a way that was such that we could move forward and go on to the core important things, the things about love, the things about respect. And what he wanted us to do on the whole, you know, with each other and with him. That's all.
Thank you. And science should never be against that, you know, they can only go together.
I just wanted to say, in the Bible, it says everything about God, and it just says how He created the earth, and it doesn't explain, like, if He used science, it doesn't explain, like, exactly how He did it, and I just think, because God says that we don't need to see Him to know He's there. He said He just wants us to believe Him, to have faith in Him, and I think by us questioning it, we're kind of insulting Him in a way, because we're not having faith that He did do it, and we shouldn't care how He did it. We should just have faith that He did it, and that He did create us, and that that's just how I believe. Like, I don't need to know how God created us. I just know that He's there. I just need to know that He is there, that He did do it, and if it was science, then it was. But that's just how I believe.
Well, I mean, different people find different sources of spirituality in science or elsewhere. There's a great quote from Francis Collins. I'm sad I didn't put it on a slide, but he was saying that as he was researching the genome, the human genome, because he was the leader of that project, that he felt it was a worship process. So,
I think it's true, and I'll get back to Sam here, that I think we need to remember that what we're asking here, we're asking two different types of questions in the main. Ross is talking about science, and a particular, I can do this, version or bent of science, if you will. But the thing that was so impressive to me when I really thought about this was that science is looking at what can be proved, right? I mean, the question of what was God doing before creation, there's no way to answer that question. That then becomes the theological or philosophical question. And we're using different disciplines. We do that, we integrate those all the time, and we don't even think about the fact that we're doing them. So I think that's an important distinction. It's one of the things I've really appreciated about Ross. He's not, he's basically saying along the lines of, this is what we can prove with the best information that we have right now. And that's all we're going for. Sam and everybody.
I think the fulcrum of the teeter-totter between the Bible and science is a stupid three-letter word, and that's D-A-Y. The Bible says the world was created in 6 days, and if you look at a large dictionary, you'll see that the word day has several different meanings. And one of the main meanings is alternative words is another three-letter word, E-R-A, era. And science says, yeah, the earth was created in 6 eras. And there's our key right there. And I think another thing we have to think about is I believe the word D-A-Y is also an English word. And Moses never heard of English. He may have written the book of Genesis in Egyptian for all we know. And there are 3 different layers of English language. Modern English, which is about 400, 500 years old. Middle English, which is almost unintelligible. One to us. One shut up with a sure, so did the drove through March every vein in which the pure engendered is the floor. And before that was Old English, going back to about 500 AD, 1000 to 500. And so what did Moses actually write the book of Genesis in? I don't know. Because that was what? Almost 2,000 years ago. For the birth of Christ, and 2,000 years before that was about when Moses perhaps lived.
He probably was in some variant of Hebrew. The Hebrew word for day, by the way, is yom. And that's so
if I may comment on that really quickly, and thank you for that. You're right, yeah, we're working with translations and we have to look into the meanings of the words. Those are really exciting and fun questions too, which should not be out of bounds. But there are many flavors of creationism, and I didn't get into that largely out of interest of time. Yeah, that's the day age theory, that each day was an era. Just to summarize, I'll tell you, I was taught in school, even up to high school, in a literal 6-day creationism. So I did believe it. I know the arguments. I'm very good at arguing, against fossil evidence, and I know those things. But let me just say, from a standpoint of what you tell your children and what we teach in schools, if you're interested in protecting them from atheism, teaching them creationism will not help. Because then when they discover evolution, then they'll say, well, what else were they not telling me about? That's right.
Okay. Actually, thank you very much, Ross. I love your new school. And I like listening to you and Josh talk about this. Because you two, it's like, well, anyway, I can't go into detail about that. I think that one of the biggest fears for me, when I first, heard about evolution was being younger, was I do come from a family where, my father is still very old-fashioned. He's into, he doesn't believe in evolution. He's against a lot of that. He doesn't want to hear it. And I think one of the biggest fears for me growing up was in that finding out that, if this is all fact, if science can explain a reason for things on how things work and things coming into being, is that it would eventually prove that God was not real. And I think that a lot of the hostility that comes from Christians is because of that. It's because I think that we feel like science will someday eventually disprove the existence of God. And as a Christian, I had to learn that I cannot defend God. God is just way too big for me, and for me to try to defend him, I think would just the ending result would be for me to become this hostile person and to say that, this is the way things are. There's no such thing as evolution. God said, let there be light, and there was light. And I remember reading this magazine, and on it had a picture of, it looked like a marble, and it said, the earth so-and-so million years ago. And I showed it to Erica Robertson, and I said, can you believe this? And she says, I believe that God can make it happen. And I thought, what a wonderful way to just mix the two, to mix the idea of God and science together, and to just open up this world of possibility for me. And I really, really enjoy not just believing that, God said let there be light, because it just leaves so many things out, and I become one of those people, who's hostile, who thinks that science is a threat, and just comes out, and sounds like, like my father would be like, with a bunch of gaps, in this wall that says, it's that way because God says it is, and then I just end up sounding ignorant. But I have to accept the fact that if I do believe in God, God will, be able to take care of those things through me, or, through science, and, and I don't have to do that and tire myself out with trying to explain things, the way that creationism does, just like God says so it is. And that was the biggest fear for me, was that eventually, God would die out because science was just too strong of a thing.
Thank you. And Paul had two really good quotes. One was Emerson, and the other one was...
That was the Bible Bill.
Oh, Jefferson has a very similar quote, and that is that the God that he would want to serve would not mind us asking these tough questions. In fact, he would encourage us to.
It's 1 o'clock. What I'd like to do is I'd like to suggest that we just get 2 more questions of people who haven't spoken yet, okay? And then do you have time?
Yes, thank you, because otherwise I would stay here until we all died of starvation.
So just let people who haven't spoken yet say something, and then Ross has some time afterwards. And
yes.
Mine is, I think, less a question as a clarification. You stated that the worst thing you could do for your child, excuse me, is to teach them creationism. because that would make them an atheist
I
when they
didn't say
start.
that.
Well, you said yes, okay. But what I want to clarify is that creationism doesn't necessarily fly in the face of evolution. That creationists who believe in a strict interpretation of Scripture as 6 24-hour days does fly in the face of science. But those of us who believe in creationism, in that God created the world, did he want to do it in 6 24-hour days, 6 minutes, 6 millennia? It makes no difference to those of us who think that way. We just lean on the fact that the greater truth of the creation story is that God created it, and that then in that respect, science does not slap Christianity in the face, nor does Christianity slap science in the face.
Right.
So I just wanted to clarify that creation, teaching your children creation doesn't necessarily mean that
Right,
they do
right,
that.
yeah, certainly. That's not what I meant to say, and I misspoke if I did. But the quote from Leanne Cheney, I think, stated that really well. All I was saying was that if you teach them the literal creationism, of 6 days and 24-hour periods or whatever, and you tell them just hold on to that for all your might, then it'll be a very painful process for them later on.
One more question, somebody has something.
It's for a team.
All right, I don't have a question. I'm jumping on the let's just give my comment bandwagon. I come from a totally different background. I was raised by Catholic parents for many years, and once I got into high school, I started, in my own opinion, thinking on my own and coming up with my own questions to ask. And I don't think anyone can argue that this book was written by man by the hand of God. And I don't see why people feel threatened that science can't be the same way. Who's to say God didn't strike a child to be interested in science and grow up to find a cure for cancer? Exactly. Or discover where we came from? That's just my comment. Like, I don't, God's in us all and inspires us to do our own thing and our own path in His way. And maybe being a scientist for evolution is God's finger in that too. So that's my feeling.
Thank you.
I want to thank Ross for all the work that he's done on this. I know that this has sparked interest in people, and I'm glad for that. I think the free dialogue of information is great. If anybody wants to continue this dialogue after this with Ross, you got time for what, maybe 4 days? No.
I'll stick around.
He'll stick around. Also, I think that certainly, Ross manages our webpage. And I'm sure that we could do some back and forth on that a little bit. I think the free exchange of dialogue is a great idea. If you have something that you would like to present on some alternative stuff on this, I think that would be cool too. I would prefer that we do it ourselves rather than bringing in an expert because I think that we love Ross because he's a part of our fellowship and we can talk to each other and we can continue discussions going and stuff like that. Whereas if we have somebody come in who, the expert on something, then we're not going to have that kind of free dialogue and those sorts of things. So just consider that. I think that's really cool. I think that anybody has an issue that they want to throw out like this, I think would be a neat way of doing it too. So again, Ross is here to answer any questions that you might have.
And if I might say, when I talked to Pastor Paul about doing something like this, I said, maybe we want to do it as a debate or an open forum or something like that. And we talked a lot about it, and I'm very thankful to Pastor Paul for letting me bounce ideas off of him. But this is kind of what we came to.
Yeah, exactly. So let's close in prayer. And
Lord Jesus, we are so grateful for the intellect that you have given us. We thank you, Lord, that you are bigger than the discussion and the dilemma, that you embody all of it. And we ask that you would give us clear thoughts and keen minds. Lord, we thank you that you work in the real world. The wonderful cartoon by your servant, not John Wilson, but whoever wrote the Far Side. Gary Larson, thank you. And then a miracle occurred is rarely in your vocabulary. That you work in the real world, but you're also God of miracles. and you are a God who did incredible things. And we just thank you that you have given us the privilege of being able to look over your shoulder as you have created the world. And so, Lord, take us home safely. Let us think through what Ross has shared with us. Let us come up with alternatives that can be tested and worked on and thrown out there in the marketplace of ideas. Thank you so much. In your name we pray. Amen.
I would think the best thing to do if you wanted to is just kind of come up here and...
There you go. Thank you. God bless you.
We didn't want anything for the preschool or anything on that, and also has to do with
In fact, even if I were a science teacher, I would talk about it in the class. I don't think it should be the school board's job to force that, but I don't think teachers should be hampered. At the same time, that's true. That's true, and I'd say that I agree that's wrong. But at the same time, science classes focus on doing science, which is the looking through microscopes and talking about how the things happen. And so science class really is the realm of science. And then for those other things, you know, that we have sociology, we have other classes.
Have you looked at any of the textbooks lately?
Yes.
My son's textbook still had images in it that have been disproved for the last 50 to 70 years, like the one guy's drawing about this. Yeah. And the leopard moth thing.
If you can show me a modern textbook with a picture of Heckel, I will pay $20.
I saw it when my kid had biology last year. It was still there.
That'll be a good way to get $20 from this. I'd like to see that. But Heckel was shown to be a fraud. What
Yeah, the peppered moth was
Stand on the edge of the Grand Canyon. You look down there and you start trying to attempt to count all of the different layers of rock. So we can come back to what I said before about today, and then it makes sense. It falls into.
Well, I would say let's keep calling evolution a theory, because in science that's the best we have. Because
what has been proved over
that's right. So we could say it's an extremely strong theory, but it's still a theory, because scientific knowledge is knowledge or truth with a lowercase t. It's provisional. And yes, we can make predictions, we can make medicine, we can do all sorts of things based on what we know from evolution, but it is still a theory. And I'd say instead of making theory be a bad thing or a questionable thing, theory be the best thing we have in terms of science. So,
what is your personal background?
My personal background? Oh, you mean like in terms of this? I was in Christian schools from 2nd grade to 12th grade when I graduated, and I did learn literal creationism. And then I went to Woodbury University to study animation of all things. So that's how I came down here. Yeah, animation. So what am I doing here? I just happen to really love science. And I think that's important, that we don't feel we have to be scientists to talk about this, to read about this, and to apply it to our lives. Yes. Oh, right. Both of those people speaking were, against intelligent design as being a scientific theory, well, just because it's not stated as a theory. But you're right that
some of the papers that try to state it as a theory don't
okay. Again, I'll give you $20 if you can give me evidence.
I have a lot of research.
Michael
I think I read that somewhere.
I didn't mean to deceive, but Michael Behe has published 2 papers, and they were eviscerated. You're right. It's intelligent design, capital I, capital D, refers to the movement, and I think those people were speaking when they said those things, and so there was no capitalization of their speaking. But I should have capitalized those there to refer to the movement and not the general idea of someone intelligent being behind the whole process, which is lowercase.
Have you considered making an actual video of this, because this could go on television?
Yeah, I think that's recording us, and we got a video over there. Thank you, John.
I mean something of
as a television series or documentary.
History Channel.
Sure. My background is animation. That's what I've learned, but my passion is animation and science. So that's my goal, is to do that sort of thing, to use animation and media to teach. And so hopefully, yes. But there are similar, shows out there.
I could see you hosting a 1-hour show on the History Channel.
Well, thank you. I really can. I'd love for them to pay me to do that. Yeah, but thank you. Yes, someone else.
Yeah, actually, two things. Semantically, there are laws in science, like the law of gravity.
Right.
So that is an absolute.
Well, no.
Well, it is certainly, that is proven in test of time, certainly greater than any theory.
But as we know,
accepted.
Right, but it works in the universe that we know, that we've explored. Law is kind of a vestigial word in science because we don't call things laws anymore. Yes, it is the law of gravitation, but again, the underlying principle here is that things we know by science, we don't just hold on to like that. You know, something could prove it wrong in the future. Something could prove gravitation wrong theoretically, but it is so well supported that we provisionally give our assent to it, and we are smart to do so.
Well, I would think that, I mean, basically, since it's not really being tested.
String theory is testing it. The idea
that's a theoretical
application.
It's like
let's not get into string theory right now. God, no. That opens a whole new can of worms.
Well, I just wanted to say that, you know, basically you said the theory was the best science could give us.
Yes.
I would not agree entirely.
Say
with
that there are laws.
There are laws that are more commonly accepted across the wide spectra of experience.
Right. Well, the debate over evolution is in the public sphere.
Well, I understand. Well, I was going to say that actually.
Right. Not
the debate over that, I have no real issue with. I have a bigger issue with, however, those who choose to not have a belief in a God of any sort, using that essentially as a tool to attack those who do. And I think that's a huge problem. I think that's something that basically makes it an issue when it doesn't necessarily have to be an issue. I think Darwin's whole point really was that he was concerned with the way that a species would mutate evolution in the more practical sense, as opposed to jumping species and having, you know, grand exceptions to rules over an extended period of time. It's sort of like you could say one species could take 5 million years to get from point A to point B. Well, you know, out in the world, there are how many millions of different things that could be mutating plant life, animal life.
Why haven't they observed that? That's one of my questions. They got species of insects that live on matter of hours. And they could have proved the evolutionary theory by just pushing the limits of one species that replicates every.
I mean, I think that's one of the flaws in the argument as far as the way it's presented to the general public. In the sense that I think most people, if you took the religious component out of it, would be in. The fact that, you know, 40% of the people don't believe in evolution, I would say that's not true. Because if you ask somebody, well, do you believe that people were different in 1800 or in the 18th century as opposed to today, physically, they would say absolutely. There's no.
That's not.
Of course,
really
well, the distinction there is microevolution, macroevolution.
Right.
That's the referral there. You said a lot of things. The first thing I'll comment on is that I agree with you that this should not be adversarial. That gets us nowhere. By all means.
Well, it can be adversarial, but it's got to be open.
Sure. Yeah, like the peer review process is adversarial, but not adversarial in the sense that we hate the person. It's the ideas we're responding to. This is the marketplace of ideas. It has nothing to do with the people themselves.
Of course, I could bring all sorts of criticism to the peer review process as well.
Okay, sure, and it's imperfect. That's the whole idea.
Extremely imperfect, and if you go into the medical community, you'll see that basically there's an enormous controversy over
people have motives, people are
companies.
getting paid to do things and publish certain things. You have right-wing facts and left-wing facts, which is silly because, you know, facts have no wings. But
science should not have a right or a left-wing viewpoint.
Exactly, yeah.
Just be an explanation
Scientists should have no wings at all. That's Michael Shannon.
But it does. Boy, does it.
But that all points to the fact that yes, humans are doing this is an imperfect process, but it's the best we've got. So let's just try to, you know, strengthen the peer review process, make sure there's no corruption, et cetera, open it up to as many people as possible.
How do we ensure that happens when the people in charge are the ones that are changing?
You're right. You know, what do we do when there's a corrupt system in charge of it? Well, then, you know, we use whatever. Wear it down from the inside or whatever. But it is a marketplace of ideas, and that needs to be your tool. That needs to be your weapon.
Yeah, in any human-governed organization, science or religion, you know, both are similar in this, right? There will be certain amounts of corruption. I mean, any human being that is given responsibility for something will do good things and bad things. We've seen that demonstrated in the scientific community. We've seen it demonstrated in spades in the religious community. And one thing that I find most appeasing about the scientific arguments is that scientists are willing to accept new data and be proven wrong. Whereas in the religious community, and once again, it varies from person to person.
But as a scientist, they have to be able to accept it in a sporting manner.
Yes, and as it is being controlled by human beings, of course, it will vary from person to person. I mean, the few quotes that I have heard of from Richard Dawkins do not make him appear to be that kind of person, whereas I know Ross is that kind of person. If you begin viewing things in the most broad spectrum that you can, you will find the bad things and you will find the good things along with it in both the religious and the scientific fields. But to be unaccepting of any sort of new theory, to be hostile when new theories are introduced, presents us as being barbaric and not progressive. And when we are viewed as being that, it's where we find our greatest downfall. The religious community cannot stand up if we're constantly knocking others down.
I think you said it, let me accentuate that a little bit, that we've all seen bad religion, we've seen fake faith healers and stuff like that, but we all know that does not speak.
Right now on TV.
Sure, there's bad religion being done, and we know that does not reflect on good religion. In the same way, there are scientists who do not follow science. They have a pet theory and they will ignore anything that disagrees with it, and we hope that the community at large will catch that and see through that. So there are scientists who do not have those proper attitudes. Again, we cannot look at those examples and extrapolate that to an entire group. That just leads to that kind of adversarial thing where we're attacking the man and not the idea.
Speaking to the adversarial aspect of it, I think all negative emotions are based in fear. When people get angry, when people get upset, jealous, protective, adversarial about their perspective, their point of view, it's all based in fear. Fear comes from lack of understanding. People fear what they don't understand. Interesting. Putting that, if you understand that and say, why am I afraid? Can I put that aside and keep my mind open to new ideas? That's the healthiest perspective. But when people get angry and upset, it's all based in their fear of not understanding.
About a week or two ago, there was a documentary on Stephen Hawking, and several years ago, he had made a statement in writing in one of his books and so forth, and another scientist came back and contradicted it. And there was a big hullabaloo, and everybody was talking about it, and Stephen Hawking said nothing. Of course, he can't talk anyway now, he has to communicate through a computer. But he finally, after a great deal of time went by, he went out on stage in front of a big convention of scientists, and he made his statement, which I guess had been pre-recorded through his computer, in which he accepted the criticism. And I don't remember if he was right or if the other guy was right. I think the other guy was right, and Stephen Hawking went out there and opened himself up.
I think that sort of thing is beautiful.
Yeah,
I mean, that just makes me clap my hands, that you can be so respectful of that process of the free market of ideas that you can take your own, theory that is your pet theory that you've gotten all your money, your research on, and just say, oh, you're right. I'm sorry, I didn't see it that way. Every now and then that does happen, and those are shining moments for humanity. As someone who hasn't spoken yet, they have anything to say?
One of the things that I found fascinating is, we have.
Thank you.
We have these two areas that have been.
Do it again. When do we get chapter 2?
We'll put this up on the web, and maybe we can get a back and forth conversation going, on the web or something.
I would like to see you do this again.
Well, thank you.
I mean it, chapter 2.
There's always more.
There's always
never ends.
Open debate, but people are equal debaters.
I'd be glad to do anything like that.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
I think we should have Ross versus someone else with baseball bats, and then whoever wins, that's the.
I don't know about the baseball bats.
Sure, why not,
I'd be willing to debate. Sure.
I'm just dancing around some semantics here, but I have done some reading as well. What I found fascinating is that there are many scientists who actually see what they're doing, their exploration of science, as an explanation of the wonders and the miracles of God's creation and so on. And we're talking about, we have science over here in many people's minds, and we have religion over here, and they're at odds with one another. Where I think where things really happen well and the best that I've seen with many scientists is that instead of having religion and science, put them together and we got reliance.
Interesting.
You know, and it's kind of odd when you look at that. It kind of came to my mind as I was standing here looking stupid. But you know, having reliance, and you don't have the conflict, and it's all going in the same direction as to understanding, learning, exchanging the ideas, and being able to describe and put into tactile terminology the awesome wonders and miracles of God.
That's where the philosophy meets the science.
And
they do need to
make it reliance.
Yes. I like yeah, I like reliance, and that's good. I'll see if I can use that. But I think that speaks to what Mike was talking about, and the issue of fear. Why do we keep these separate? Let's not fear them mixing, and what will happen? Let's see what happens, you know? We don't need to be afraid of that process.
Egos happen. Oh, sorry.
Egos happen, and let our egos be torn down.
You take that fear and turn it into fascination. You know, I'll get alliterated.
Alliterative, thank you. Yeah,
I'm weird that way. I come up with words all the time. You take the fear, turn it into fascination, and then that then comes together again. If you got your heart and your mind in the right place, then you have that reliance, if you will, and you make strides, massive strides ahead.
Or more to the point, take the word wonder. Most people are wondering what's going on, but if they experience true wonder at all the information that's available to them, that they're allowed to process, that they get to choose between. Free will. God gave us the greatest gift of free will. We get to choose whether to believe or not. We get to choose what we're going to ally ourselves with.
Yep.
That's the gift.
No, you gotta leave. You gotta believe. You gotta
Are you looking burned on the stage?
He's in sales, folks. He has to say that.
Many years.
What is belief if we don't sit back and ask ourselves, why do we believe too? You know, let's test it. Let's say, what is my belief based on? Am I just blindly saying, oh, okay, you know, or am I saying,
I believe that's called a lemon.
Like, could I go that way or could I go that way? Let me research which way I want to go and make a conscious decision on where I want to go.
Absolutely.
You know?
A funny little side note, you know, we found out over time that lemmings don't actually do that. There was Walt Disney or his company that released a documentary about that, and they faked it. They forced these lemmings off the side of a cliff and
murderers.
Yeah. Yeah, lemmings don't actually commit suicide in mass every year or anything.
Oh God, that's funny.
However, Disney executives do.
I've seen it off the top of that building just down the street.
But to what you were saying, that's absolutely right. And I think that belief needs that sort of verification, because otherwise aren't all beliefs on the same footing then? Yeah. Isn't any belief the same as any other belief? We have to look into it, and we have to have reasons why one belief is more valid than another.
Mine was from just what you're doing, diving into it, and I didn't get that until after God stepped into my life and saved it. Yeah. I mean, and I was 40 years old when He did that.
Yeah,
and I've been fascinated with this stuff ever since. I'm just not very eloquent.
Well, there's blind faith and then there's blind acceptance. Just accepting anything you're fed without questioning it.
Yeah.
That's a scary term to me. Blind faith, when taken in that context, is very frightening. It's your obligation to question and test and have a dynamic with your faith. It's a living, breathing, growing animal, and you've got to have a relationship with it, or it's going to kill you.
Well, I don't think God has a problem with that. Somehow.
Christ told us to do it, as a matter of fact.
Yeah. Aren't we supposed to wrestle? I mean, that's what we do, right?
There you go.
I don't know, are you aware of the difference between the names Israel and...
slave of God versus wrestles with God.
Yeah, Islam means slave of God. Israel means wrestles with God. It's part of who we are. We're supposed to wrestle with God. We're supposed to, come on, bring it on, God, kind of thing, as opposed to going, okay, here I go off the cliff. You know, that's what we're supposed to be about. Yeah, if you say so.
Because I said so.
Wasn't it David? Who was it? Shoot. Was it David or was it Paul who literally said, you know, God, I think he even spoke on this once last year about wrestling, literally wrestling with God.
It was Jacob.
Jacob. I knew it was close.
At Peniel. You know, yeah, exactly.
Literally wrestling with him.
Which is why he gets the name. Jacob becomes Israel, which means he who wrestles with God. See, I think you've got biblically, you've got a complete understanding. That's exactly what God wants. God doesn't want people who honor Him by just going, yep, Yeah.
Buzz click.
Exactly, yeah. I mean, I hate to put down that group of people, but, because they blow you up. I didn't do that, it was him. But they're in their middle ages right now. You know, I mean, someday they're gonna come out of that. They were, at one point, the most enlightened people.
There are shining individuals.
Absolutely. That's, yeah. So, you know, but I think.
Well, when you get to some of the weird countries like Iran, you can generalize there.
There are shining examples in Iran, too, but we don't hear about them.
We would never hear about them.
Yeah. No, because
if we were to hear about them, they'd be executed the next day.
Thanks a lot for doing this, Ross.
Absolutely.
Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank
Hope
you.
there are more of them.
Okay.
I would love to debate him, but I would have to have an expert to debate it because I'm not eloquent enough.
They say I would be in a battle of wits, and he would be facing an unarmed man.
It's not that I don't have the wits, I just don't have the mouth that goes with